9 rich and famous people who once lived in a car. 1. Chris Pratt. At 19, Chris followed a friend to Maui, Hawaii. He set up a home in a flea and mice-infested van.
We just drank and smoked weed and worked minimal hours.
Pratt recalled.
Just enough to cover gas, food, and fishing supplies.
Rae Dawn-Chang met Pratt when he was waiting tables. She cast him in her directorial debut, Cursed Part 3. 2. Jim Carrey. Jim once lived in a tent on his sister's front lawn. He dropped out of high school. At first, he lived in a VW camper van with his family. They eventually moved into the tent. It was in those tough times that Carrey developed a sense of humor. 3. James Cameron. Cameron wrote The Terminator without much hope. He could barely make ends meet. He had to live in his car because it was all he could afford. Eventually, Cameron partnered with producer Gail Ann Hurd. Hurd bought the rights to the screenplay for $1. She named Cameron the director. The movie went on to make $77 million worldwide. 4. Dr. Phil. Phil McGraw, aka Dr. Phil, was homeless at 12. He lived in a car in Kansas City with his father. Phil's dad was interning as a psychologist. Phil later went on to obtain his own bachelor's, master's, and PhD. He joined his father's psychology practice in Texas. In the 1990s, Oprah invited Phil to appear on her show. The rest is history. 5. Hilary Swank. Hilary grew up in a trailer park. As a teenager, Swank pursued a career in acting. Her mom brought her to LA, but they couldn't afford a place. So they slept in their car while Hilary went to auditions. Then a friend let them stay in an empty house up for sale. They slept on air mattresses as there was no furniture. Swank went on to win 2 Oscars before turning 30. 6. Steve Harvey. Steve was just starting out as a comedian in the late 1980s. His position was precarious. After 1 or 2 gigs fell through, he found himself homeless. Harvey lived in his 1976 Ford Tempo for 3 years. He washed up in hotel bathrooms, gas stations, or swimming pool showers. Then he was called to appear on Showtime at the Apollo. That gig turned out to be Harvey's big break. 7. Tyler Perry. Perry moved to Atlanta to launch a play. He'd saved up $12,000 to put up the show.
I thought 1,200 people would show up that weekend, but only 30 showed up.
He recalled.
My car payment, rent, everything was tied up, so I ended up homeless with no money and nothing to my name.
Perry had to live out of his car, which wasn't comfortable.
Can you imagine a 6'5" man sleeping in a Geo Metro?
It would take years for him to make it, but he's now a billionaire. 8. David Letterman. Letterman went to LA to get into showbiz, but he didn't have a place to stay or money for a hotel. So he lived out of his 1973 Chevy pickup truck. He ended up writing a gig for Jimmy Walker. That was his big break. 9. William Shatner. After Star Trek was canceled in 1969, Shatner couldn't find work. On top of that, he'd just gone through a divorce. It left him broke and with nowhere to go.
I had 3 kids and was totally broke.
Shatner said.
I managed to find work back east on the Straw Hat Circuit, but couldn't afford hotels. So I lived out of the back of my truck, under a hard shell. It had a little stove, a toilet, and I'd drive from theater to theater. The only comfort came from my dog, who sat in the passenger seat and gave me perspective on everything.